Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a longer one, and that happens to be Growlanser on the PS2. But to be more accurate, we're going to be talking about Growlanser Generations, which is a compilation game that comes with 2 games within the series. And weirdly enough, this package was exclusive to North America. Yeah, not even Japan got this. But to be fair, they did get another collection that came with 3 games instead of 2, so technically they got more than us, but whatever. But before we talk about the games themselves, let's talk a little bit about the series in general. So it's a series of tactical strategy RPGs, and all the games are developed by Careersoft. And believe it or not, this series is actually a spiritual successor. So the original series that Growlanser is based off is Landgrisser, and there's quite a few similarities between the two, but I'll talk more about that whenever I do a review on that series. So in the main line of Growlanser games, there's only 6 of them. So the first one was released on PS1, PC, and the PSP, but sadly, none of these came outside of Japan. But then 2 and 3 came out in the same year in Japan in 2001. And these are the 2 games that eventually did come outside of North America, known as Growlanser Generations. So this combo pack was released in 2004, and it was published by Working Designs. And you know what that means, whenever Working Designs publishes a game outside of Japan, they really seem to spoil us quite a lot. So as usual, you get a really shiny cover, which looks awesome. You get a really thick manual that has tons of pictures and color, and if you get the deluxe edition, it comes with a deck of cards. And you also get a silk pouch, and inside this you get a ring. So that's all well and good, but unfortunately I don't have the whole set. But to show you guys some of the stuff that you would normally get if you got it brand new. So you get a big box, which is also very shiny looking. You also get the soundtrack with 20 songs. And you get a smaller box that comes with a watch. So I don't know about you, but that's a pretty damn good collector's edition if I say so myself. And even if I am missing quite a few things from the collector's edition, I'm just thankful to have what I have. So with that said, now let's start talking about the games themselves, and the first one in this package is Growlanser 2, The Sense of Justice. So let's talk about the story first. So there are 2 kingdoms at war with each other. There's the kingdom of Rolandia and the kingdom of Bernstein. So the main character of our story is named Wayne Cruz, and he is a knight in training of Bernstein. And he really likes exploring ruins, but one thing that he likes even more than that is that he wants to become an Imperial Knight, which is the highest ranking of knighthood. So he first sees the instructor at the Officers Academy in Bernstein, who happens to be Logan. And after setting off with a training mission, you happen to meet someone else, and that happens to be Maximilian Schneider. So Maximilian is a very serious character, but he only wants to become a knight so then he can become a diplomat and get into politics, so he can prevent wars from ever happening. So after doing some skirmishes and a bunch of missions, they end up meeting another character named Hans, who is an orphan that is way too happy, and eventually he joins the Knight Academy. But they also meet another character named Charlone, who is an aristocrat who also wants to become an Imperial Knight. And her 2 reasons are that she idolizes a character named Julia, who is also an Imperial Knight, and her younger brother Pietro is very sick and she wants to help him. So these are the characters that mostly travel with Wayne. But of course there's tons of other characters that join up, like Rivia, who is a mage, and then Xenos, who is a mercenary, and a mysterious girl with a pet wolf named Aritia. But one thing that is interesting to note about the story in general is that this story actually takes place in the same time as the first game. But we wouldn't know that on our own because the first game never came outside of Japan. So you do see a lot of the same characters within the first game in this one, such as the protagonist named Carmine, and even Xenos was in the first game as well. So it really makes me wonder why they didn't release the first game as well, since this game is clearly connected to it, but I'll talk a little bit about that later. So that's all I'm going to say about the story here, because the story is pretty damn huge, and also there's a lot of plot twists and turns that I don't want to spoil. But to sum it all up, it's a pretty lighthearted story, involving teenagers that are not only trained knights, but also want to go on an adventure and discover new things. In the back of all this adventuring is a bunch of political stuff. So meaning that the story in this one is not only lighthearted adventure, but it's also pretty political, which is a pretty interesting mix if I say so myself. But one thing I will say about the political stuff is that I didn't find it to be boring whatsoever, which is always a plus, because one problem I do have with some games being overly political is that they bog you down with way too much information that really isn't necessary. But in this game, I think they did a pretty decent job. So now, let's start talking about the gameplay. So I think talking about the battle system first would be much easier to explain. So you know how most tactical RPGs it's always a grid base, in games like Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem? Well, this one does something entirely different, and that happens to be a free range movement tactical RPG is what they call it. So pretty much everything is all done in real time, so meaning that it's not turn-based. So every character on the field is time-based, and whenever you perform an action with a character, you can't make another action with that character until the gauge fills up again. So physical attacks have to move towards the enemy, except for archers, but of course they have a certain amount of range. And magical attacks take a certain amount of time for them to activate, but magical attacks also do have the best range within the game. So because all the units move around at the same time, there will be a lot of situations where you're gonna have to think on your feet. So it does make a lot of battles pretty intense and not as slow paced as you might think, although some characters' walking speed can be pretty slow. And this game has a wide variety of missions where some of them are just simply clear out all the enemies, protecting a character from getting knocked out, or just simply surviving, since every mission has its conditions on winning or conditions on losing. So next, let's talk about the equipment system. So all the characters can equip an armor piece and a ring weapon. So the ring weapons is basically a ring that can turn into a weapon, and it's always different with every user, which is pretty badass. And you can equip gems onto the ring weapons. So all the gems that you collect give you different stat boosts. So like gaining more health, gaining more MP, or gaining more strength, speed, all that kind of stuff. But one thing that is nice about these gems is that you can actually level up the gems themselves so they can be much better. And you can only equip 3 on a weapon, but you can't just put any gem on any weapon you want, because the gem slots have different levels where you can only equip a gem with that level or lower. And whenever a character levels up, you can add in points to gain different skills. So there's quite a bit of customizations that you can do within this game. And now, as for the last part about the gameplay is the exploration, and this is a weird one. So traveling is all done on a map where you go from circle to circle, going to different towns and other various places. And when you enter these, you can either read signs or talk to villagers, and of course doing this will lead to events that will progress through the game. But while going from circle to circle on the map, you can encounter enemies. So at first you may think that this is just the typical way of how you're supposed to go from other towns, which it is, but you also do fight monsters at the same time. But now I shall explain the most fucked up thing about this game. Now remember when I said when you want to trigger events that progress through the story, you have to enter towns and talk to people and such? So the very important thing you need to know when going into this game is that this is a very flexible game, meaning that progressing through the story can be done in many different ways. So because of this game can actually get really confusing on figuring out what you're supposed to do and where you're supposed to go. So let me tell you my experience with this. So I got to a point where I had no idea what the fuck I was doing, and I was just randomly bumping into enemies, so I figured I might as well grind while trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing. But after getting tired of doing the same old stuff over and over, I decided to look at a guide. So after looking up a guide and some walkthroughs, I realized that the progression of the game can be done in many different ways. So I ended up being even more confused than I already was before I looked it up, since I already started a file and did my own thing and then realized that looking up a video, someone did it completely different. So if you want to beat this game 100%, then you're gonna have to use a guide, because I can't imagine doing this blind. I mean, hell, you might as well just use a guide from the start to finish. Because if you start mid-game blind and then want to look up a guide if you're ever stuck somewhere, then it just gets really complicated. But I eventually did figure out how to progress the way how I did, but let me tell you, it was not easy. So that's probably one of the hardest parts about the game in my opinion. Especially the fact that they don't tell you where to go a lot of the times. So that's all I have to say about the gameplay. Instead of being a real-time strategy game, it's a real-time tactical RPG, which is quite interesting. So now let's start talking about the controls, and there's not a whole lot I can say here since you are just moving around and selecting things. But one thing I am glad is that the cursor when you want to move a unit to a specific area is actually very responsive. Because in a lot of games where you control a cursor with a controller, it can be really annoying and frustrating, where this one does work really well. But other than that, everything else is very easy to understand. So now, let's start talking about the other things, like the graphics. And I do find them to be quite fascinating. So first of all, I have to mention is that the game's art style is fucking amazing. So if you've seen my review on the game Bulk Slash, I said something about the art style in that game really reminded me of something from this game. Because that game's art style does sorta remind me of this one, and it was done by Satoshi Yorishihara. And I have to say, it might just be one of my favorite art styles within anime. So I really love the character designs within this game. I think they all look amazing. So that's all well and great, but as for the in-game graphics, I think the sprites look okay, but some of the backgrounds, some of them do look kinda nice, but then some of them do look a little bit bland. And to be quite honest, I find this game doesn't look much like a PS2 game, it actually looks more like a PS1 game being revamped on a PS2. But I suppose for a game that was originally made in 2001, would look more like a PS1 game than a graphically amazing looking PS2 game. But I wouldn't say the overall graphics are bad, I just think it could have been a little bit better, but for the most part though, I do quite like it. But like I said, I think it's the character designs and art direction is really what takes the cake. So if I say so myself, the in-game graphics are good but not amazing, but the art direction is just phenomenal. And now, as for the game's music, I really like it a lot. So you get a lot of really nice relaxing songs, and you get a lot of intense music which does suit the epic battles. I really can't think of any complaints about the music whatsoever. There's a lot of songs in here that I really like. Sure, there might be like one or two that I don't care for as much, but for the most part though, I do think all of it does suit the game very well. But I really do love the songs like An Ordinary Quiet Day, Be a Winner, The Whereabouts of One's Victory, and Emergency Battlefront, just to name a few. But yes, personally, I really like the music quite a lot within this game. And now, as for the game's voice acting, it's pretty fuckular. But I personally consider this to be one of those it's so bad that it's hilarious. But it still doesn't change the fact that it's still pretty fucking bad voice acting. So a lot of it just sounds very bland and robotic sounding, and then others just sound super duper ridiculously campy. I'll just play you some examples that I thought to be quite amusing.
I am volunteering as a test subordinate so you can practice.
What about you then? If you are to be an officer, you must have the very same skill.
No, I won't.
So, who do we have here?
I am Maximilian Schneider, a cadet in the Officers Academy.
Good to meet you.
And I'm Wayne Cruz, a fellow cadet. Is something wrong?
Nah, I'm just sizing you up. When you're a mercenary, you need to know exactly what kind of people you're dealing with.
Wow! You guys were amazing! Pow! Shing! Bap! You sure showed those monsters who's boss! I think that's the coolest thing I've ever seen! We're just happy you survived uninjured. Yeah, enough talking about me. I heard what that knight said, you're gonna fight more monsters. Can I come?
That is out of the question. It's far too dangerous.
Minister Schneider makes a request of us. We are to comply at once. So hurry to his office.
I understand, sir. We'll go at once.
Good. But your party's not complete yet. Apprentice Knight Charlone Claudius.
Did you call, sir?
You are to go with Wayne as an attendant.
Me?
What, are you hard of hearing now? Yes, you. This request came directly from Minister Schneider. We can't refuse it.
I can use my connections here in Rolandia to get new leads. Why did you shriek? Is something wrong?
Yeah, we got some Academy Award winners right here. Well, if you're one of those people that really doesn't like bad voice acting whatsoever, at least they do give you the option to turn it off, which is a good thing. Although I think having dual audio would have been a much better option, but if you really don't like listening to the voice acting here, then at least you can turn it off. But as for me, I like to have it on just because I just think it's fucking hilarious. But overall, the voice acting here is just not done well at all. Now as for buying this game segment, well, I'm going to do that near the end of this video, so for now we're going to be skipping on to my overall thoughts on this game. So personally for me, Growlanser 2 is an awesome tactical RPG, and if you're really hardcore into this genre, then I can highly recommend it. So I really love the story within this game. I think all the characters are great and have some really good interactions and some really good development, and you got some really interesting plot twists which I was not suspecting. And I really do like the battle system quite a lot because it's not as slow as you think it would be, since everything is all done in real time and you have to think quickly. And the equipment customization is a very nice feature. But to me, the one flaw that this game has is the way how you progress through the story, like I was bitching about earlier. Now, personally for me, it was not a turn-off, it was just really fucking annoying, but I can see it being a turn-off for many players, especially for new ones. but I will give them some credit that it is a pretty ambitious idea to have something like this in a tactical RPG, but I think if they were going to do this, they should have at least explained it better. But other than that one thing, I think everything else about this game is pretty damn good. And like I said, if you're a big fan of tactical RPGs and want something new and you haven't played this, then I can definitely recommend it. But if you never played tactical RPGs or you're just not into them, then I can't recommend this one. Also, this game is pretty fucking hard. And I don't only mean it's hard because you're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go sometimes, I also mean it's hard because some of the battles. So this game is not beginner friendly. But if you do like these kinds of games and you do want a good challenging one, then this would be a good one for you. So that's all I have to say about Growlanser 2, so now let's get moving on to the second half of the package, and that happens to be Growlanser 3, The Duel Darkness. Although I think it should have been called Growlanser 3, The Duel of Darkness, but okay, whatever works, pal. And this game came out the same year as the second game, but actually came out at the end of the year. And there's quite a lot of similarities, but there is enough different stuff to talk about here. So first, let's talk about the story. So this game takes place 1,000 years before the first two games, making it a prequel. So within this world, the sun is dying, and a lot of the kingdoms around this time are going through a civil war due to the fact that there's not much food left. So it stars the main character named Slain, and you wake up in bed and you realize that you have amnesia. Oh boy, I wonder how many games start out with that kind of storyline. So anyways, it turns out he fell off a cliff and then he got rescued by someone named Annette. And she is the daughter of the president of Zeronia Federation. So she really wants to help Slain out, and just so you know, Slain in this game is actually not like Wayne from the second game because he's more of a silent protagonist. So there's a lot more choices within the game that do affect the story. So while Slain and Annette try to go back to the main town, they gotta be careful of two things. First thing they gotta be careful of is that there's a lot of wars going on and they could potentially run into one. And secondly, there's a crazy maniac assassin going about named Randolph, and he seems to know a lot about Slain and he wants him dead. But as the adventure continues, they happen to meet some other characters. Like there's Raimi, who is a dark fairy that cannot be seen by normal humans, only very special people can see them, and one of them happens to be Slain. And then there's Hugh Foster, who just happens to be a traveler who is quite possibly one of the most campiest characters ever. So here's a couple things from the highlight reel.
In dangerous places, I'm your man. They say I'm the handiest man around. Burns is right. You're hot. You're one lucky fellow to be traveling with a sweet thing like this. If you insult me first, it'll make it easier on me. Look, I am not a happy camper right now. I think it's time I shared the love. Winning is much better than losing. He's a general in the Empire Army. One tough cookie, I've heard. Don't worry your pretty little head about that. I'm sure it will. Guaranteed.
How can you be so confident?
Aw, you're looking at me like you have doubts. That hurts, Annette. Seriously, right here. My heart's got a boo-boo. Would you like to kiss it? Grab some popcorn. The plot is definitely thickening.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that him and Frank from Shadow Hearts from the New World would really get along well. And as for the final main party member you get is Monica, who is a half Featherian and half human. Basically, to sum it up, Featherians are kinda like elves in a weird way, but just they have wings. But because she is half and half, her wings are not fully developed. And she always wants to help out one of her friends who happens to be Michelle. And the whole thing with Michelle is that she's a girl that has been locked inside a room because of her weak immune system, therefore she can't go outside. Especially when things like wars and the sun dying and such, it's just not good. So this one already has a much smaller main cast, but there are two guest characters that do join you every now and then, like Victor Hugo, who is an engineer, and Yoya Tachibana, who is actually good friends with Hugh. So just like the first game, it's kind of like a mix between a lighthearted adventure and a whole lot of political stuff in the back. Although I'd say that the story in this one, it's much more darker than the second game. And as cliche as the amnesia thing is, they did make a pretty interesting twist about it, but unfortunately I won't be able to explain it here unless you want spoilers for a pretty obscure game. So I didn't mind that so much. But one thing I will say about the story is that I think it starts out pretty damn slow, but then it picks up, and when it does pick up, it picks up really good. And even though this game has a much smaller main cast than the first game did, unfortunately, I don't like the main cast as much in this game compared to the second game, because in the second game, I pretty much liked all the characters, but in this one, I only liked maybe 2 or 3. And just those examples is that I really like Monica's character. I thought she was done really well. And as for Hugh, at first I really didn't care for his character at all. In fact, I thought he was just really fucking annoying. But eventually though, he actually did pick up to be a pretty interesting character, which is a good surprise. But as for the rest of the characters, they're not bad characters by any means. I just don't think they're as good or as developed as you think they would be. But I think that's all I'm going to say about the story for now. So anyways, let's start moving on and talk about the gameplay. And there's not a whole lot I can say here, because this game for the most part is a lot like the second game. So the battle system and the customizable equip system is pretty much the same. But the way that you use special powerful spells is that you have to use two characters cooperating with each other, which does make it a bit more interesting. But the one really big improvement that I can already say right off the bat is the exploration. Now, you remember what I said about the second game where you had to go across a map and of course everything was just really fucking overly complicated and it didn't tell you jack shit? Well, in this game you're not going from circle to circle, there's actually a world map. And whenever you go into towns, you can actually walk around inside the town. And there's dungeons which are very maze-like. And that right there, I can already say it's much better than in the second game. And that also means there's no weird fucked up way that you can progress through the story, it's just exactly what you would suspect. So pretty much, it's a typical RPG, but just when you go into battles, it plays like a real-time strategy RPG. So that right there is pretty awesome. And that's all I gotta say for the gameplay, because I don't want to repeat myself from what I said from the second game's gameplay, so now let's start moving on to the other things, like the graphics. And the graphics this time are pretty much exactly the same thing from the second game, since both games came out in the same year. So like I already said about the second game's graphics, some of the backgrounds look nice, some of them are not so great looking, but as for the art style, it's just fucking awesome, I love it a whole bunch. And the game looks more like a very beautiful looking PS1 game than an amazing looking PS2 game, but for the most part though, it's pretty much the same shit. And now, as for the game's music, for the most part, it does have a lot of the same songs, or at least like a rearranged version of the same songs. And it does have a few newer songs which do suit the game, and I do like the sound of it, but sadly, I find that a lot of the music in this one is not as memorable as it was in the second game's music. But it still has quite a few good newer songs, but it does have a lot of songs that are just kind of forgettable, but at least they're not horrible. And they do suit their appropriate areas, but I don't have a whole lot of complaints with the music. But I do feel personally that the second game's OST is just much better in my opinion. And as for the voice acting here, it's just like the voice acting in the second game, meaning that it's pretty goddamn fuckular. So you already heard a lot of Hugh's lines, who just happens to be corny as a can of corn. But yeah, exactly what I said about the second game's voice acting does apply here. So yep, nothing much to say here. So now, as for my overall thoughts on this game, is that I do find that Growlanser 3, for the most part, is an all-around better game than the second one. So it still keeps the same battle system, which I do really like a lot, and the biggest thing is the exploration, for like I said, you can actually travel through towns and dungeons and such. And it doesn't have a crazy flexible way of progressing through the story, and the game is also much easier. Of course it still has its challenging parts, but I'd say it's a much more easier game to get into. But the one thing I do find that is better about the second game over the third game is the story and characters. Because sadly, for me personally, I did find that the third game story did start out pretty slow, where the second game story kinda got me interested as soon as I started playing it, and then just got even better, where the third game kinda starts out slow, but then gets better as it progresses. And I pretty much liked all the characters of the second game, where the third game I only liked like a few of them. But I think when it comes liking the story of 2 or 3 more is really a preference thing, since both games still have the same idea of being a lighthearted adventure with some political stuff in the background. So as I said, it really comes down to being a preference thing, but personally I think the second game's story is better. But when it comes to gameplay, I'd say that the third game is just a way better game. And not only would I recommend it to those who really like tactical RPGs, but I'd also recommend it to those that do want to get into the series, since this one is not only a prequel, but it's also a much easier game to get into than the second game. So out of the 2 games that come out in this collection, I'd say starting out with 3 would be your best bet. And yet I happened to play the second game first because, well, it was number 2 and I had no idea about 3 being a prequel until much later. But either way, that pretty much sums up the collection of Growlanser Generations, and I think it's actually a really solid one. Although I really wish we did get the first game as well, but at least we did get 2 and 3, which are both still really good games. But sadly to say, this was actually the last game that Working Designs ever put out. But as sad as it is, at least they ended their swan song with something that was actually really good. But of course, I really do wish they were still around, but at least there are companies out there that are pretty similar to them. Some examples of those would be like Xseed or Atlas, which, by the way, Atlas actually published a Japanese version of the two games I had just taken a look at. So now, if you want to buy Growlanser Generations, there's a ton of different options out there. So if you just want the standard game with both discs and everything, it usually costs about $40 to $50. Although there's a couple of them for $30, but not much. But as for the complete set that comes with everything, it's about $150 at least. So it is a pretty uncommon game, and it's also one that I just barely ever see. But let's just say you get the regular edition for $40, you're pretty much getting 2 games for 20 bucks each. Which doesn't sound so bad considering that this is a game that I really do enjoy quite a lot. But one last thing I should say if you do plan on buying this game is that it's a blue disc game. So in case you don't know what I mean by a blue disc game is that there are some PS2 games out there that have blue discs. So the difference is that the blue discs are CD-ROMs where the regular white discs are DVDs. So the reason why you see more PS2 games that are on DVDs and CDs is because not only does it have more storage capacity, but also the games just run a lot better. Because sadly, as cool as the blue discs look, they can be very finicky to run sometimes. And they also make your PS2 sounding like it's about to launch a missile. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where that one urban legend came from. So that's something I just wanted to explain, just to keep in mind if you do plan on buying this game. So that's all I have to say about Growlanser Generations. It's a pretty solid package of obscure tactical RPGs that I can definitely recommend. Especially the third game, since tactical RPGs are not for everyone. But if you do want to get into them, I will say 3 would be your best starting point, since starting off with number 2 can just get really confusing. And before I end it, there's a couple other games within the Growlanser series I do want to touch base on quickly, but I'm not going to do a review on them today, but of course I will do them some other day. So after Growlanser 3, there's Growlanser 4, Wafer of Time, which was originally released on the PS2, but only in Japan. But it did get a remake on the PSP, and this one actually did come outside of Japan. Although sadly it did not come out in Europe, but at least the PSP is region free. And as for the next one, there is Growlanser 5, Heritage of War, and this one came out in all regions, making its first debut in Europe. But one thing that is pretty fucking weird about this one is that the Japanese title of it is Growlanser 5 Generations. Yeah, not to be confused with our Growlanser Generations. And as for the last one, there is Growlanser 6, Perculia's World, which is only on PS2 in Japan. So there you have it. That's pretty much the entire series as of yet. And as much as I do like tactical RPGs, I do consider them to be a pretty big favorite of mine. So I think this video has gone on quite enough, and I'll end it here and say thank you for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
I'm going over there to chat for a while. Wait here.
What was that all about?
He's quite obviously girl hunting.
Well, I got news for that bitch. Her shit ain't any more fragrant than mine, and I'll prove it to her when I make her lick it off the end of my dick.